If you've taken anything away from this series so far, I hope it's that people have a strong personal attachment to their first experiences with a story, and if an adaptation doesn't play out the way they thought it would in their imagination, they tend to be very critical of that adaptation as a result. I am in no way saying that the criticisms of the Deen anime are unwarranted, and if anything, you could say the opposite is true about me, because it was the first Fate anything that I ever discovered. So I have a personal and unfair bias towards it, and I'm unfairly generous towards it. But this problem exists almost everywhere you go in online circles. You talk about a movie, anime, or TV show that you like, and right away you're met with a ton of pretentious commenters saying, read the book, it's better. Play the game, it's better. Read the manga, it's better. Read the manga, it's better. Strangely enough, nobody really talks about the manga for Fate Stay Night. Maybe that's because, as we established in episode 0, it's also an adaptation. The visual novel is still the original, so people tend to get more hipster before it was cool points for defending this, rather than the manga in this instance. But this does beg the question of, is the manga any good? I plan to do an entire video series talking about each individual volume of this manga, so we'll keep it short for now. It's pretty much a straight adaptation of the Deen anime, with a few scenes playing out differently. It follows the Fate route pretty closely up until when Rider is defeated by Saber, and then it all of a sudden takes a hard left turn into the Unlimited Blade Works route. The art is questionable but passable, and the atmosphere is still mostly intact. It ran for only 11 volumes before its publisher, Tokyopop, went out of business, leaving another 2 or 3 volumes on the cutting room floor. Hard to recommend considering it was never finished, but if you're a hardcore Fate fan or a Type Moon collector like I am, it's worth checking out. So, where were we? Oh yeah, we were reviewing an anime, weren't we? Let's get back on track. Backed into a corner, Archer uses his noble Phantasm. Unlimited Blade Works is a reality marble which transports the people inside of it into a pocket dimension based on that servant's legend. Reality marbles appear in a lot of different Type Moon works and do various different things. This one in particular is a realm filled with nothing but swords, and Archer can control them as he wishes. He kills Berserker several times over, but for some reason the beast still stands. Archer's body finally gives out as his remaining mana is finally depleted, and our badass rogue servant disappears. Rin and Shiro continue to flee through the forest carrying the weakened Saber, until they discover an abandoned shack. They realize if they have any hope of standing a chance against Berserker, they need to find a way to allow Saber to regenerate her own mana so she can recover on her own and use her more powerful attacks without running out of energy. Rin believes the best way to do this is for Shiro to transfer his dormant magic circuits to Saber so she can use them. He won't ever be able to increase his magic potential from here onward, but it's a necessary sacrifice in order to allow Saber to fight without this obnoxious handicap. There's no easy way to say this, but in the visual novel, this was our first hentai scene. Halfway through the first route. What a great hentai game, right? So how does the series handle this? Things start off pretty steamy, with Rin stirring up feelings of lust in both Shiro and Saber, but it takes a hard turn into cringy territory right away. With what I'm sure they thought was a clever visual metaphor for Shiro literally having his magic circuits ripped out of him, results in an awful, out-of-place CGI dragon. This scene is pretty easy to mock, and is the subject of a lot of ridicule from most people who dismiss this series as bad. They wake up the next morning and discover it was a success, and Saber's starting to recover nicely. This, accompanied with some powerful magic gems that Rin has stored away, gives them all the confidence they need to take on Berserker again. Even though some of the new animation for this fight scene is pretty cool, it doesn't excuse the fact that they reused almost all of the animation from the previous Berserker fight. Granted, I never noticed this my first time watching through the series, and I didn't even notice it up until writing this video, but now that I see it, oh god is it noticeable. Thankfully, the later Fate adaptations had a bigger budget and a higher quality production studio, and came out in an era where recycling animation is just never seen or heard from ever again.
I had a feeling that this was going to happen. Gotcha!
So, did that kill him?
No way!
Ilya reveals that Berserker's Noble Phantasm isn't an offensive attack like a legendary weapon, it's more of a passive ability that gives him a significant advantage in combat.
That he won't die for good unless you kill him a total of 12 times. 12 times? That attack you landed on Berserker did take one of his lives, but he still has 7 to go.
Oh, come on. If Hercules was actually trying here, Rin would be the one dead 12 times over. Shiro somehow develops an incredible burst of courage, probably from getting laid last night, and he decides he wants to use his projection magic to project Saber's sword, thinking it will allow him to do some damage to Berserker. Like I said in the previous video, the concept of servant dream sharing has already been established, so the image of a sword has been burned into Shiro's head. And surprisingly enough, it works. Saber informs him that this sword is Caliburn, the sword that allowed her to become king when she drew it from the stone. It's very different from Excalibur, and the two have very different capabilities as a noble phantasm. They finally return home with some additional company. Ilya has a very good story arc over the course of this story as a whole, especially when you take Fate Zero into context. But damn is she not irritating in this route. Part of this is the fault of the animes and its script, but she is just insufferable. She spends the first half of the story as an antagonist, and is blatantly rude and disrespectful to our main characters for taking pity on her, and taking her in after her servant's defeated. Ilya is the master of the Ainsburn family, a family of mages as old and prestigious as the Tosakas and the Matos, and the three of them have been fighting for generations. Their magic focuses on homunculi and artificial beings designed to interact with magic and call forth the Grail. So as you can imagine, Ilya has some special qualities about her. Later that evening, Saber tells Shiro she also shared a dream with him, and caught a glimpse of his past. If I haven't made it clear enough by now, I do not advocate watching Fate Zero before reading or watching Fate Stay Night, but this is one of the many scenes you can view through a new context if you've seen Zero. Upon seeing that fire from 10 years ago, Saber knows that Shiro's life has been irrevocably impacted by not only the Holy Grail War, but by Saber herself and her actions. She feels immediately sympathetic to him, but also can relate to his desire to selflessly sacrifice himself to protect others, because she herself once held a similar ideal. More incidents of people falling ill, slipping into comas, or dying continue to occur. Rin theorizes that because Berserker has been taken out, the Master at Ryudo Temple is beginning to intensify their activity. She rather accurately points out that it would be a bad idea to just nuke the temple with Excalibur because other people live and take refuge up there. Ilya actually proves to be useful to them in this situation, much to the surprise of the audience, I'm sure, as she has a ton of intel on the Master at Ryudo Temple. Not only does she tell them the Master is actually a servant herself, the mage-type caster class, but she even tells them she knows Castor's heroic identity as a servant, that of Queen Medea from Greek mythology. How Ilya learned all this is beyond me, but it does help from a narrative standpoint because they're able to front-load all this exposition now so that we can get all of it out of the way before we run into this character again on screen. Shiro learns from his classmate Issei that their teacher, Soichiro Kuzuki, has been taking refuge at Ryudo Temple. So by putting all the clues together, they assume that he either has a knowledge of who Castor's master is, or he himself could be Castor's master. So that evening, they head out into the city to try to ambush and interrogate him on the matter.
It deflected off him. Teleportation.
I believe I warned you this might happen, Master Soichiro.
This fight does not go as planned, though, as Castor has used her magic to enhance the physical strength of Kuzuki. Combined with the fact that he already has significant martial arts training, he can greatly compensate for Castor's lack of strength and do the fighting for her. Shiro realizes if he doesn't do something fast, they're going to be killed. So on a whim, he decides to try projecting archer's swords, and it works surprisingly well as he's able to hold his own against Kuzuki for a little while.
Castor takes advantage of Shiro and Rin not being at home and goes after her real objective. She kidnaps Sakura for the purpose of using her as a human sacrifice or a magic vessel for the Holy Grail.
Sakura! You got careless, Saber. This is my noble Phantasm. It negates all other sorcery. Rule Breaker.
Because Sakura was holding the Rule Breaker dagger, she was only able to debuff Saber, so to speak. If Castor had been holding the dagger directly instead of using it vicariously through another person, she could have negated any magical contract that Saber had, including her command seals with Shiro. Not that that would ever happen or anything. They immediately head for Ryudo Temple to confront Castor and rescue Sakura. They find an alternate way in that leads them through a secret pathway into Castor's magical structure that she's created beneath the temple. After confronting some of Castor's stone golems, we finally have our matchups ready to go. Saber vs. Assassin, Shiro vs. Kuzuki, and Rin vs. Castor.
Episode 18 here probably has the worst animation overall in the entire series, but the fact that they keep cutting back and forth between the three fights does make the shortcomings a little less noticeable.
Assassin tells Saber that because he was summoned by another servant, he's sort of a false servant. He's based on a fictional hero, which I always thought was bullshit and unnecessary to put in the lore, but he only has enough mana to last until sunrise, so he's been running on borrowed time ever since Castor started focusing more on the Grail. So his only desire is to have this final epic duel with Saber. The fight itself is pretty cool, even if it doesn't really do much for the story and only serves to add a little character context for Saber.
I thought of you as a beautiful little songbird, but in reality, you were nothing less than a lion.
Castor is controlling Sakura with magic and forces her to attack Rin. Rin manages to save Sakura from the spell but sustains an injury in the process. This doesn't really matter to Castor as she knows the latent magical potential of both girls is the same, so even if she frees Sakura, Castor can just sacrifice Rin for the Grail all the same.
This scene is a huge character revelation for the audience. Rin and Sakura are sisters, separated at a young age. Sakura given to the Mato family because the latent magical potential in their lineage was starting to dry up, and they needed somebody who was a capable magi. This is one of the reasons why I defend watching this before Fate Zero, because in Fate Zero, this information is established in the first episode, which means if you went into this series, or Fate Stay Night the visual novel, already knowing it, this revelation would just fall flat. This whole scene tends to fall under a lot of ridicule from people that are less than favorable to this series or the visual novel purists. And I suppose I can see why. The whole black bondage suit thing is really weird and out of place, and I'd be lying if I didn't think that this whole sudden plot twist about them being sisters seemed a little unnecessary and out of place, even my first time viewing the series, but because it's a plot point from the visual novel, that is an adaptation mistake I can definitely point out. But allow me to play devil's advocate for a minute. This is one of the scenes that people point to when they talk about how the Fate Stay Night the Deen anime tries to take way too many story elements from the other routes in the visual novel and combine them together into the Fate route. I'm not here to tell you that your criticism is wrong if that's your personal take on it. I just don't agree with that as a criticism. If anything, I feel like it helps to get this plot point out of the way so that when it comes up in Zero, you're more empathetic to the characters. So I ask again, what specifically do they try to add into the Fate route that makes the story work less?
Saber defeats Assassin just in time to assist Shiro and Rin in their fight. Considering that Castor has the home field advantage here, they might still be outmatched. Were it not for the sudden appearance of...
That's enough. It seems to me you've forgotten your place, half-breed. As the king, she belongs to me.
This mysterious new servant rains down a fury of swords and effortlessly dispatches Castor and her master. The two of them share a tender moment, Castor informing Soichiro that her wish had come true. And with that, her magical fortress starts to disappear, and our main heroes quickly retreat with Sakura in hand.
You do have to give this story some credit that with each antagonist that's defeated, we have a great scene that really lets you empathize with them and understand them better as characters and what motivates them. Shinji, of course, being the one exception. Rotten hell.
The Saint Seiya cosplayer over there informs us that he and Saber have unfinished business from 10 years ago, and that he had proposed an offer to Saber that went without an answer. Rin suspects that the only way it's possible for the servant to exist is if he was the winner of the previous Grail War. Saber more or less confirms this by saying that the two were never able to finish their decisive battle. He's an extremely powerful archer-class servant whose identity still remains a mystery to her, and his objective isn't to kill her, but to subjugate and marry her.
We're then treated to a wonderful scene where Shiro and Saber finally develop a strong mutual understanding of each other. There's a lot of these scenes between now and the end of the story, and I don't intend to fully spoil these for those of you that haven't seen them. Saber reveals that Kiritsugu, Shiro's father, was her master in the previous Grail War, and by the end of the conversation, Saber understands what it was like for him to live through that horrible tragedy and what his upbringing was like. And he understands everything she had to sacrifice to get to this point, and by telling her that she should give up the idea of redoing the selection of the king and start over a new life in this era is terribly disrespectful to her and everything she had to commit and sacrifice in order to achieve this wish.
Part of the reason why Shiro even suggests this is largely because ever since that hot and steamy night in the woods, he hasn't been looking at her the same, and he's been developing romantic feelings for her. He's desperate to find a way to hold on to her and not let her go at the end of the war, so he decides to head to the church to question Kirei on what he knows about the Fourth Holy Grail War, the strange new servant, and if the Holy Grail can prevent Saber from disappearing in the end. Kirei manipulates Shiro again, making him believe that he needs to win the Grail in order to use that power to grant Saber a second life, further forcing him to fight for Kirei's amusement.
With the end of the war right around the corner, Shiro decides this is the perfect opportunity for he and Saber to spend some quality time together, further giving in to his selfish desire to romance her.
And one of them includes taking Saber out on a date tomorrow.
This scene does break the pace of the story a bit, but it's just so damn cute. It's hard for me to be mad at it. Saber does have a few cringy fish-out-of-water moments, but they're not incredibly awkward like a lot of other magical girlfriend types of shows would do. Overall, it's a net positive.
I find it to be most charming. Do you think that's odd?
Their date ends with them watching the sunset over the river. As pleasant as that was, our whimsical break is ruined by the single worst Shiro moment of the series.
Shiro argues with her over whether or not her wish is even worth pursuing in the first place. I get that he's in love and he wants her to stay, but this is horribly disrespectful to her considering they just talked about everything she sacrificed in order to get here. This is the second chance at the Grail that she didn't think she would get, and now here she is almost at the end with it within her grasp, and he's telling her it was foolish for her to even consider redoing the selection of the king in the first place. I understand the point he's trying to make, and it could work, but he is not being fair and compromising, and he's certainly not placating to her wants and desires and trying to make a compromise where she'll actually stay.
To make matters even worse, he runs home in a temper tantrum and just leaves her there. After letting off some steam, he comes back to her, but she just sat there the whole time not knowing what to do. It's really quite sad. As cute as it is to see them holding hands and walking together, it just bothers me so much that he didn't properly apologize to her. Their peaceful walk home was quickly interrupted by the appearance of...
Don't walk off with something that doesn't belong to you, boy.
Golden Boy here completely wrecks their shit, leaving them both in a bloody mess. He reveals himself to be Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamian history. His noble phantasm, the Gate of Babylon, is a storehouse of legendary treasures. As I explained before, a noble phantasm is just the manifestation of a servant's legend. So Gilgamesh has one singular noble phantasm. It just so happens that it gives him access to countless weapons, including prototypes of weapons that hadn't been invented yet. His most powerful is Ea, a tool used by the gods to sculpt the earth. Its destructive power is unlike any other. In one last-ditch effort to convince Saber he can protect her, he confesses his love to her.
There's nothing more valuable to me than you!
Shiro.
There's nothing in this world that could ever take your place!
Rather than project Caliburn this time, he tries to use his projection magic to project something brand new, Excalibur's scabbard Avalon. Its power reflects Gilgamesh's attack back at him. Taken aback, he retreats. This gives us my favorite visual in the entire Fate route.
Shiro.
They finally return home to rest. Saber stubbornly avoids the subject of her wish to redo the selection of the King of Britain and insists on making Shiro something to eat so he can recover some strength. Although she's not as skilled at preparing food as she is at eating it. Shiro shows her some technique, and they share a tender moment.
You could say that the romance in this series is awkwardly forced into the end and it doesn't fit, and you may have a point. But I first watched this series almost 10 years ago, and I've seen it from beginning to end almost 8 separate times, not including recording this footage. And this scene still gives me a strong emotional response.
We talked in episode 0 how in the visual novel, each route evolves on Shiro's perspective on his ideals from one route to the next. The same can be said about each route's respective romance option. I won't go into too much detail here because we'll cover those romance options when we get to those routes. But the romance with Saber is beautiful and tragic in a way. It's your naive, unrealistic fairy tale romance. They do have a lot in common, and Saber knows this. But as she points out, she's being pretty unfairly treated by him. He's being pushy and prioritizing his feelings over their mutual goals, and he's being very disrespectful to her and the reason why she's even here to begin with.
See, in real life, when someone has a lot going on in their life and they're struggling their hardest to focus on an ambitious goal they're trying to achieve, they may not have the luxury to consider romance. If you confess your feelings to them in spite of that, you're burdening them with your feelings. They may not know how to respond, they may even feel the same way, but you're putting them in a compromising situation that's unfair to them where they feel obligated to respond. I understand what Shiro is saying. He makes a good point when he says that she did everything she could to protect her people, and she shouldn't squander this wonderful opportunity for a second life and a do-over. And don't get me wrong, deep down in her heart, she desperately wants this, but she knows that she can't.
I think what gets me the most in this scene is the framing and the music. It's absolutely breathtaking, and if I haven't bragged about the soundtrack enough in the previous video, this is one of the best tracks in the series. Now that he's gotten that out of his system, he heads back to the church to ask Kirei about Gilgamesh and gain some guidance on how to move forward with their next battle.
Just because this is a church area, that doesn't make it wise for you to be looking into all of its dark corners.
Have we made a drinking game yet for how many times Shiro is left lying in a heap? Anyways, imagine that the last remaining servant is working with the last living person who knows how the Holy Grail War works. Saber, realizing this just in time, rushes to the church to save him.
This horrible basement level of the church is apparently where Kirei has been harvesting and feeding human souls to Gilgamesh to keep him alive for 10 years.
Kirei insists that his only role is to determine who is the most worthy to possess the Grail, saying if Shiro and Saber wanted it, he would gladly give it to them. In a rather profound character moment for Shiro, he tells Kirei right to his face that if the Grail could turn back time and fix the events of 10 years ago, he wouldn't accept it, because it would be a huge disrespect to the lives that were lost that day and the scars that the survivors bear to this day. Kirei, now realizing there's no point in continuing to manipulate Shiro, reveals the truth about the Grail. No matter what you wish for, it will always cause chaos and destruction.
Part of the reason being that it's actually cursed, but we'll get to that later.
Now that Kirei is finally done playing with Shiro, he orders Gilgamesh to kill him, only for Lancer to step in and choose the side of justice.
Holy Grail?
You're missing the whole point! Real epic heroes don't give a damn about a second chance at life!
The two of them escape, and Lancer is quickly pinned down and defeated, leaving Saber and Gil as the only remaining servants, just like 10 years ago. Through this scene, the character arc we've had over the past several episodes finally comes full circle. I talked about how Shiro is being immature and unfairly prioritizing his feelings over his respect for Saber's ambition and goals, Here they finally decide to compromise in the face of the true nature of the Grail. Shiro makes peace with the idea that he'll have to let her go, and wants her to be happy doing what will put her at ease, while she lets go of her regrets, and embraces Shiro's advice about not redoing the selection of the king. They both agree that if the Grail is a cursed weapon of mass destruction, they should destroy it, and make peace with their decisions. It's a beautifully wrapped up character arc for both of them. They return home and find Rin in a bloody mess.
Oh, it's not Shiro this time? I'm sorry.
Kirei beat them home and ambushed Rin. His objective wasn't to kill her, however, it was only to get to Ilia, since he intends to fulfill her purpose of being the vessel for the Grail. Rin reassures them that she's already healed her injuries and gives Shiro some instructions for the upcoming battle.
She gives him an Azoth dagger, a ceremonial dagger used by Magi to pass down from master to apprentice when they've graduated from their training. Very fitting, I suppose. It's charged with a magical energy that should be enough to give Shiro an edge in his fight against Kirei. If you haven't figured it out by now, the reason why Shiro is able to regenerate wounds while he has his pact with Saber is because of Excalibur's scabbard, Avalon. It was planted there by Kiritsugu 10 years ago in order to save his life during the tragedy. This is also why Shiro was able to use projection magic to bring it out. It's like it's been there in his head the entire time, partially because it has. This is also why Shiro is able to summon Saber in the first place. This is the same holy relic that Kiritsugu used to summon her in the first place. It was no accident when he summoned her that fateful night.
Shiro decides it would be best to give Saber the scabbard back, so she can have a fighting chance against Gilgamesh, putting her at full power. He would be going into the fight with Kirei with a major handicap, but he's willing to take that risk for the final battle.
Once the scabbard is removed from you, you have a great deal more to lose.
I know. Once it's gone, if I get hurt, I'll stay hurt. That's all right. I think I've been relying on that too much lately anyway. If you're hurt badly enough, you die, and I think that's the way it should be.
What are you cutting back to me for? Alright, I guess it's time we finally address one of the most well-known and controversial things people associate with this series. People die when they are killed.
What's so stupid about this is it's not even the line in the officially subtitled version you can get on the DVD or Blu-ray. This is so obviously from a bad fan translation, it just literally shows the direct translation from Japanese. This is such a common problem in a lot of anime, but I don't see a lot of these bad translations getting as much ridicule as this scene does.
You see what you've done, you filthy internet-dwelling casuals? You just let meme culture formulate your opinion on something even though you knew nothing about it, even when that meme in question doesn't even come up until the final act of the story and is not even in the officially translated version of the series that you would watch today.
With that garbage out of the way, it's finally time for our final battle. Gilgamesh doesn't want to outright destroy Saber because he wants her to marry him, so he allows Shiro to leave and go fight Kirei so they can have a proper decisive battle. This final fight is very well done overall. Beautiful lighting and use of colors, the ashes coming down from the portal to the Grail invoke images of cherry blossoms, and it really sets the stage for this final battle. The animation holds up with no real recycling going on this time, and Kirei's breakdown of his nihilistic ideals is downright fascinating. His obsession with Kiritsugu was sparked by how similar but opposite they were, and when he learned about Shiro being his adopted son, he set out to systematically orchestrate this war just so he could watch Shiro struggle and fight up until the very end so he could see the futility of his foolishness come to an abrupt end. Kirei breaks down the nature of mankind and how their desperation to survive in a life-or-death tragic situation is the only time that they can truly transcend the mundane and become more than what they are, claiming that his desire to cause destruction is not out of a hatred of mankind, but a love for it.
Kirei is just a truly wicked and fascinating villain. Just excellent writing across the board here in all aspects of his character.
When they both appear to be beaten down, Shiro and Saber invoke the holy power of Avalon to turn the tide. Shiro manages to break away from the Grail's curse, and Saber gives herself a window to land a sick counterattack on Gil. Shiro manages to finally land a hit and releases the magic within the Azoth dagger.
The irony here is just delicious.
Gilgamesh shows a new appreciation for Saber, saying he's discovered someone so beautiful and strong they could never be made to be his possession. And with that, after 10 years, he finally disappears. Shiro retrieves Elia from the Grail portal and gives Saber the command to destroy it.
Now, for the ending. What can I say, other than it's breathtaking?
Our unlikely love-struck duo says their goodbyes over the beautiful mountaintop sunrise. Shiro returns to his normal life, his heart full of love and his spirit full of the drive to become the best champion of justice his father or the world could ever imagine. Artoria returns to her own time, just after the Battle of Camelon. Bedivere returns Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake, and she dies peacefully in her sleep under the tree.
Fate has had a very profound impact on my life. I plan to talk about this more in other videos, but one of my favorite things to do every single year is to lead the Type Moon meetups at anime conventions in the Southeast. It's a deeply meaningful and rewarding experience, and I have met some of the most impactful and influential people in my life through this community. And it all started with this series. If you're not convinced, I understand. Opinions are opinions, and to each their own. The visual novel is the superior medium to tell this story, as I established in Part 0. But if I could be honest for a minute, if you played this visual novel, you didn't buy it, you didn't support the official release, you probably pirated it online somewhere. And that's because this visual novel still does not have an official English translation. Playing this right now does not support Type Moon in any possible way, and that's not really your fault. It's actually a huge pet peeve of mine. Why is it that Fate has become so relevant and so popular now, and we still don't have an officially localized version of the original visual novel? It makes no sense. If you're interested in seeing the Deen anime, this original collection by Geneon is expensive and out of print, and will probably run you about $150. This series spent quite a long time in copyright limbo, but was eventually picked up in 2013 by Sentai Filmworks, and a rerun of the DVDs was released. This will cost you about $30 to $35 online. I bought this copy at Walmart. It's pretty easily accessible nowadays. I had a dear friend that gave me her collection of each individual volume of the Geneon DVDs as a gift one time, and while I'm sure you're not watching this, I just wanted to say thank you all. I will cherish these. So what's next from here? Well, in 2010, Studio Deen adapted the Unlimited Blade Works route of the visual novel into a movie. I could review this next, but I'm actually planning on doing a side-by-side comparison with this and the 2014 Unlimited Blade Works of the series. So the only logical step to go from here is back to 0, where from the beginning, you know the end. Till next time.